The release of Twin Peaks to network television on April 8, 1990 would change the way we view television forever. Nowadays, we become accustomed to overarching, narratively complex television. Television that feels more like a very long movie instead of a show. Before Twin Peaks, TV shows were almost exclusively episodic, meaning each episode stands alone. The sitcom is a classic example. While there may be slight evolutions in the characters and plot in earlier sitcoms, for the most part they came down to the formula. What goofy situations will our cast of characters find themselves in today? Events that seem like they should have long-reaching implications are forgotten by the next episode, and events of the past are rarely referenced. You'll also see this in Monster of the Week television shows, where while there may be a greater plot stretching the duration of a season, it is usually laid out in little bits and pieces until the finale, and the bulk of the episode is spent on whatever monster or conflict is presented to the characters. Twin Peaks is what we call a serialized television show. This means a show that has a continuous plot that unfolds in a sequential, episode-by-episode fashion. Every episode picks up right where we left off with the last, tackling the same conflict, the same story. There are countless examples of these shows today, and many are considered to be some of the greatest shows of all time. The Sopranos, The Wire, Breaking Bad, etc., etc. This is not me claiming that Twin Peaks was the first serialized television show. I Love Lucy had elements of serialization, even though it usually played out in an episodic manner. There's a long list of British programs that were serialized. The soap opera boom in America introduced a much wider audience to serialization. But one of the more significant examples of this kind of television was Hill Street Blues, which followed the stories of cops working in a large metropolitan city. And one familiar name worked extensively on that show as a writer and executive story editor: Mark Frost. Mark Frost was born in 1953 in New York. He spent his teenage years in Minneapolis, where he worked at the Guthrie Theater, then studied acting, directing, and playwriting. After graduating in 1975, he went to LA and landed a series of jobs writing for television. In 1981, he became a staff writer for the acclaimed series Hill Street Blues and remained with the show until 1985. The next year, he met David Lynch. David Lynch needs no introduction. Lynchian is a term often used to describe the strange and offbeat, the surreal and dark, contrasted against the simple and mundane. The Elephant Man was met with enormous critical acclaim. Dune was a bust, but an interesting one, and still has a cult following. But in September of 1986, it would all come together for Lynch with a movie that both was true to his creative sensibilities, satisfied critics, and reached a large audience: Blue Velvet. With this movie, Lynch would become very, very famous. Which brings me to my final point before we dive into the making of Twin Peaks. A large part of what makes the show so special, so unique for the time, is Lynch himself. This is in no way downplaying Mark Frost's influence, as he contributed significantly to the story and also deftly wrangled Lynch's free-flowing narrative style into something that would work for television. But for a director who was as applauded and acclaimed as Lynch to take on a television show was unprecedented, unthinkable. While he still might not have earned himself blank checks at this point for his movies, he was at a level of fame and accomplishment where he could take on just about anything he wanted. And what he took on at this point, after the highs of Blue Velvet, was Twin Peaks. Welcome to the making of Twin Peaks. One tiny note before we begin: much of this information is pulled from the book Room to Dream, so if you want an even more detailed recounting, I highly suggest you read it. Our story begins with TV agent Tony Krantz, who worked for the Creative Artists Agency and began pursuing Lynch aggressively with the goal of having him make a TV show.
Television seemed like a horrible thing to me, and in those days it was pathetic. All the commercial interruptions. Network television was the theater of the absurd, and this was the nature of the beast.
It was Tony Krantz who brought Lynch and Frost together. They immediately clicked. They had the same sense of humor and enjoyed making each other laugh.
Upon meeting him, I kind of felt like Huck Finn meeting Tom Sawyer. We sort of looked at each other, and there was like a twinkle in his eye that I kind of recognized, and I thought this might lead to something. We have a great time doing it, and I think that's kind of the key to the success of the show.
Mark was with fancy computers and keyboards and is a proficient typist. I would lie on a kind of a chaise lounge and it looked like I was Mark's patient and he was my psychiatrist, if you looked in the window or the door.
The two had a successful pitch meeting with ABC in March of 1988, but because of the writer's strike in August, everything got pushed back. This strike remains the longest strike in WGA history, at 153 days.
We had been talking for some time about doing a television show together. This goes back about almost 2.5 years now, during the writer's strike of 1988, when we had little else to do. We started talking about a little town in the Northwest that had a mystery around it, that had a murder that took place, that took us into the town and started to lead us through a kind of labyrinth of secrets and mysteries that lay underneath the surface of it. We had an agent, a mutual agent, Tony Krantz, who insisted that we take this idea to ABC.
Mark Frost recalls, "When the strike ended, they called and said, 'We want to proceed with that project you pitched.' But by that point, neither of us could remember much of what we had said, so we talked about it some more, then met with them, and were told to go write. We knew it was going to be some kind of serial about the murder of a homecoming queen, and the first image we had was of a dead body washing up on the shore of a lake." Frost deserves a lot of credit for bringing Twin Peaks to a television set. His experience in the industry was invaluable. "Initially, part of my contribution was that I knew the ground rules for television more than David did," Frost said. "Scenes would suggest themselves and we hammered them into shape, and there were certain characters that one or the other of us had the voice for more authoritatively. Structure might be a little more my strong suit, but David's got tremendously enhanced ideas about mood and character and small details and behaviors that are indelible and unique." Frost says their biggest disagreements were on the tone of the show. "David's tastes run darker than mine, and that was a point of departure on occasion, but we somehow always resolved it."
I'd never written with a partner before, neither had David, and what you quickly realize is that it's quite a bit like a marriage. I mean, you've got to have a formula for compromise that will get you out of those corners that you sometimes paint yourself into. And I think we managed to do that fairly well.
I find it inspiring that despite their disagreements, they never gave up. They always found a way to compromise so that they could see this project to fruition.
I had a few doubts about the midget. Initially, I wanted to know a little bit more about who he was and where he came from and why he was dancing. But once we kind of reasoned that out together, again, it's like being at the UN. You've got to just first decide on the shape of the table, and then you can decide on the particulars.
Well, how long did it take for them to write the pilot? Frost remembers. "We wrote the pilot fairly quickly. I don't think it took more than a month, and the first draft was the final draft." The two returned to ABC with the new pitch. Brandon Stoddard, the president of ABC Entertainment, enjoyed the script and ordered the pilot for a fall series in 1989.
Well, we didn't really want to do it unless we could get carte blanche, because what we had sort of envisioned doing was so different from anything else that we'd seen that for us was an important part of the agreement to go ahead with this thing. Mm-hmm. And they were very cautious about getting involved with us because they didn't really trust the efficacy of the idea. They weren't really sure if it was going to work.
ABC called the two in for a meeting and soon learned that if they wanted to make the show happen, they needed to relinquish a little control. Of this meeting, Frost recollects, "I remember an executive taking a list of notes out of his pocket and saying, 'I've got some notes if you're interested,' and David said, 'No, not really.' And the guy quietly put the list back in his pocket with a sheepish look on his face. That set the tone of, 'You wanted something different, so don't screw it up.' And they did very little meddling. The only terms that ABC required was that the pilot be shot with a closed ending. This was so they could release it as a feature film in Europe. It was a network stipulation that turned out to be a blessing in disguise for the world building of the show, as it indirectly led to the creation of the Red Room. Easily recognizable with chevron patterned floors and red curtains, the Red Room represents a spiritual realm where characters reveal secrets and riddles and entities speak backwards. The idea had come to Lynch in a predictably unusual way.
One summer day, I was at a laboratory called Consolidated Film Industries in Los Angeles. We were editing the pilot for Twin Peaks and had finished for the day. It was around 6:30 in the evening, and we'd gone outside. There were cars in the parking lot. I leaned my hands on the roof of one car, and it was very, very warm. Not hot, but nicely warm. I was leaning there and psst, the red room appeared, and the backward thing appeared, and then some of the dialogue. So I had this idea, these fragments, and I fell in love with them. That's how it starts. The idea tells you to build this red room. So you think about it. Wait a minute, you say. The walls are red, but they're not hard walls. Then you think some more. They're curtains, and they're not opaque. They're translucent. Then you put these curtains there, but the floor, it needs something. And you go back to the idea, and there was something on the floor. It was all there. So you do this thing on the floor, and you start to remember the idea more. You try some things and you make mistakes, but you rearrange, add other stuff, and then it feels the way the idea felt.
The idea of speaking in reverse had remained in Lynch's head since 1971, when he had Alan Splett record him saying, "I want pencils," backwards for a scene in Eraserhead that was never shot. An extended version of the pilot that concluded with the Red Room ending was released as a straight-to-video film in the UK, 5 months before the pilot aired in the United States.
I saw the pilot as the same thing as a feature film, and as far as I'm concerned, the only thing in the entire first 2 seasons that's really Twin Peaks is the pilot. The rest is stage stuff and was done like TV, but the pilot really got the mood. That had everything to do with the fact that we were shooting on location. The place itself is so important. It's always arduous to shoot on location, but it was really beautiful there, and there was a feeling of freedom, because we weren't bothered by ABC at all. They sent notes a couple of times about language and made me change some lines, but the lines I made up turned out to be better than the original ones ABC didn't like.
And now let's talk about casting. Because David Lynch is, well, David Lynch, the casting took on a far more free-form, far more, you could say, vibe-based approach than a more traditional director would approach it. Actor Ray Wise, who plays Leland Palmer, observed, "For David, it's all in the casting. He's very intuitive, and for one reason or another, he'll feel a connection with an individual and know how to place that person in the piece. The actors feel the trust he has in them, too, and it encourages them to let down their inhibitions and just go with whatever happens in the scene. For example, our sweet, lovable deputy Andy Brennan, played by Harry Goaz, was first discovered when he was serving as a chauffeur for David Lynch. At the time, I was a young whippersnapper scuffing around Los Angeles with some worn-out Tony llamas, working 2 jobs and studying. One of my jobs was as a driver for a private car service that specialized in getting high-profile types in and out of places with little fanfare. One night, I received a call to pick up Mr. Lynch in the Hollywood Hills to take him down into Hollywood for a memorial ceremony for the late, great Roy Orbison. At the time, Mr. Lynch was already known to me as the director of Blue Velvet, which happened to be an indelible game-changer of a film for me as a young and hungry artisan. He was very open, affable, and completely without guile. After I dropped him off, I impulsively decided to pull up and just sit in the car and see if I could see him coming out. He seemed surprised that I was still waiting. At the end of a very long evening, as I was pulling up into his driveway, he asked me what I did besides driving. I told him that I was an actor. His demeanor seemed to shift to a solemn and serious shade. He nodded his head and said, "It's the hardest life." I said, "Yes, sir, but you have to love it." He nodded and said, "That's it. You have to love it. You have to love it." He told me he was working on something very special and asked me to send in my picture. Voila! Thank you, universe, and Mr. Lynch. The Arm, as he is called, played by Michael Anderson, was seen by Lynch in a nightclub in 1987, and Lynch immediately envisioned him to play Ronnie Rocket, the main character in a long-standing script written by Lynch that, unfortunately, has never been made into a film to this day. When Ronnie Rocket didn't work out, Lynch knew he'd be the perfect, strange character for Twin Peaks. The ghostly star of the show, Laura Palmer, is played by Cheryl Lee, who on meeting Lynch was so nervous that she had to sit on her hands to hide their shaking. But she was charmed by Lynch, who ended up loving her so much that he insisted on finding another role for her as Laura Palmer's cousin.
But Laura is dead, but you're also Madeline Ferguson.
Yes.
I see.
Laura's cousin, Maddie.
Laura's cousin. And they did that, you weren't going to originally do that.
No, I wasn't. I was originally hired for about 3 or 4 days worth of work as a corpse.
Yeah.
And
They called you up and said, "We want you to play a dead bod."
Kind of, yeah. I met with David, and he talked with me about what it would entail, just lying there on the beach, wrapped in plastic and cold. And the little clip of the picnic, the home video thing, and that was all at that point.
But then it went well and they created Madeline.
Yeah.
And of course, she would reprise her role as Laura Palmer in the movie Fire Walk with Me.
I love David. He is one of the most remarkable people I've ever met on this planet. His sense of humor is fantastic, and creatively, I think he's a genius. Working with him there are no words to explain it. It's like you go in and you have to be living completely in the moment and be ready to go wherever he takes you. And you never know where that's going to be. And he's humble and he's kind, and he comes from a very good place. He has a wonderful soul also, which I think is incredibly important.
And of course, there is our leading man, FBI agent Dale Cooper. Lynch has said that Kyle MacLachlan was born to play this role. Coop is an exuberant, instantly lovable, deft, and analytical detective who serves as the spiritual core of the show.
The character of Agent Cooper came from a lot of different things. For instance, Uma Thurman's father is tight with the Dalai Lama, and she had a thing for him at her house that I went to, and I met him, and that's what led to Agent Cooper being for the Tibetan people and the rock-throwing scene.
But Lynch didn't just find the right people for the characters, the right people became new characters.
Another thing in the pilot, there was a one-armed man, and this was Mark's idea as a kind of a homage to The Fugitive. Al Strobel was hired to walk out of the elevator when Cooper came out of the elevator, arriving in Twin Peaks. That was it. That was all Al was hired for, to walk out of the elevator. But when I got to speaking with Al and hearing that incredible voice and seeing that face and the whole thing, things started happening in my brain, and I found myself, as we were driving, Deepak driving me to work each morning. We were going off the freeway, and we were coming down into North Bend, and there's these new gas stations there, right on the turnoff, the ramp coming down, through the darkness of future past, the magician longs to see, came, and I'm starting to write this stuff down.
So I wrote a new scene where Al meets Cooper in his room, and he recites this thing, and we shot it and sent it to Dwayne, who was editing. It's late at night, and Dwayne's about to go home when he gets this footage, and he says, "What the fuck?" But the scene with Al started a whole bunch of threads that bring him into this story.
There is another, even more significant example of this serendipitous casting. Bob, the mysteriously demonic figure only seen by few.
When we were shooting the pilot for Twin Peaks, we had a set dresser named Frank Silva. Frank was never destined to be in Twin Peaks, never in a million years. But we were shooting in Laura Palmer's home, and Frank was moving some furniture around in her room. I was in the hall underneath a fan, and a woman said, "Frank, don't move that dresser in front of the door like that. Don't lock yourself in the room." And this picture came to me of Frank in the room. I went running in and I asked Frank, "Are you an actor?" And he said, "Well, yes, I happen to be, because everyone in L.A. is an actor, and maybe everyone in the world." So I said, "Frank, you're going to be in this scene." We did a pan shot of the room, twice without Frank, and then one time with Frank frozen at the base of the bed. But I didn't know what it was for or what it meant. That evening, we went downstairs and we were shooting Laura Palmer's mother on the couch. She was lying there in sadness and torment. Suddenly, she sees something in her mind's eye and bolts upright, screaming. Sean, the camera operator, had to turn the wheels and follow her face as she bolted up, and it looked to me like he did a perfect job. So I said, "Cut, perfect, beautiful." And Sean said, "No, no, no, it's not." "What is it?" There was someone reflected in the mirror. Who was reflected in the mirror? Frank was reflected in the mirror. So things like this happen and make you start dreaming, and one thing leads to another, and if you let it, a whole other thing opens up.
The pilot was allocated a budget of $4 million and began shooting February 21st, 1989. Filming wrapped after 22 days. It was shot on location in Snoqualmie, North Bend, and Falls City, Washington.
This pilot was shot up in the Northwest, just east of Seattle, in the most fantastic area with beautiful forests, waterfalls, rivers, and it was in the winter, so it was always overcast, raining, freezing cold, but it had a feel, had a most fantastic feel.
They put the whole cast and crew in a Red Lion hotel and we filled the entire place, said Amick, who played Shelley. It was like being in a college dorm, with people running around and visiting each other's rooms. Interior scenes were shot in a San Fernando Valley warehouse. Scenes for Invitation to Love, the soap opera within the show, were filmed in Frank Lloyd Wright's historic Annis House in Los Angeles. One of my favorite cast anecdotes comes from Cheryl Lee, who remembers the day she played Laura Palmer's washed-up, discarded body. It was February in Washington, rain was falling on and off. Needless to say, the water was frigid. I kind of went into a meditative state, and I remember thinking, this is my first set, and I'm lying here very quietly, and I get to be like a sponge. I'm hearing everything and learning what all the different departments do. It was a great way to learn, playing a corpse. A titular part of Lynch's methodology is the shifting of ideas. He works with what he has available to him instead of ruminating on unrealized potential. His fluidity is something everyone who works with him remarks on. Richard Baymer recalled that David took the script seriously, and of course we were expected to learn our lines, but he often made twists and turns that came to him spontaneously. I came in one day while we were shooting, and I was standing in the back waiting, wearing a new pair of shoes that were kind of stiff. As a kid, I'd learned to tap dance, so I was doing a little of that to loosen up the shoes. And he sees me and comes over and says, "Do you dance?" I said, "I used to dance a little." And he said, "Why don't you dance in the next scene?" I said, "David, in the next scene I'm talking about murdering someone." And he says, "It'll be great. In fact, you should dance on your desk." His directing helped bring the most out of the characters, and the most out of the people behind the characters, the actors. Sarah Palmer is played by Grace Zabiskie, who has one of the most difficult performances in the pilot, if not the most so. I remember being on set one day and David asking, "You got another one?" I replied, "David, I went over the top 17 takes ago." "You don't realize how much you're withholding until you work with someone who doesn't want you to hold back," said Zabriskie. "I can present just about anything that comes into my head to David, and if he can use it, he will. Every project I've done with him has been deep fun. There's a back and forth between us that's subliminal and unspoken, and all the more precious for that somehow." "David doesn't tell you who the character you're playing is," says Amick. "He let me find Shelley and watched how I started to crawl into her skin. Then he responded to that." He would alter the script as they went along to allow room for more characters as their performances evolved. "I think I know why David gave Nadine more to do," says Wendy Roby. "There's a scene where a camera was set up across the street, looking at the picture window in the Hurley house, and I was inside, opening and closing the drapes. There was no dialogue, you just see this figure in the window working on these drapes back and forth, and while we were shooting I could hear David laughing on the walkie-talkie a PA had in the room. David kept the camera running and continued laughing, so I kept it up to the point that my hands were bleeding." Now would be a good time as any to talk about another aspect of what makes Twin Peaks so memorable: Angelo Badalamenti's magical score. Badalamenti began playing piano at age 8 and continued to play throughout his youth. In 1959, he graduated with a master's from Manhattan School of Music. He was introduced to Lynch in 1985 when a producer brought him in to work with Isabella Rossellini for a pivotal scene in which she sings Blue Velvet in the movie Blue Velvet. He and Lynch immediately clicked. During the production of the film, Lynch sent him lyrics to a song he had written, Mysteries of Love. Badalamenti essentially said, "Those are just words. What do you want me to do with them?" To which Lynch responded, "Make it into a song." And in a way, this became their collaborative style, as demonstrated in this moving video of Badalamenti describing the time he and Lynch worked together to create Laura Palmer's theme.
This is the keyboard that all the major themes were created for Twin Peaks. It's an old Fender Rhodes. And David would sit right over here, right to the right of me, and we would put a little cassette just about over here on this keyboard, just keep it in record and just keep it playing. David would sit here and I'd say, well, what do you see, David? Just talk to me. And David would say, okay, Angelo, we're in a dark woods now. And there's a soft wind blowing through some sycamore trees. And there's a moon out, and there's some animal sounds in the background. And you can hear the hoot of an owl, and you're in the dark woods. You know, just get me into that beautiful darkness with the soft wind. And I started playing. Then he would say, okay, Angelo, now we got to make a change, because from behind a tree in the back of the woods, there's this very lonely girl. Her name is Laura Palmer. And it's very sad, but get something that matches her. And I just segued into this. Well, that's it. It's very beautiful. I could see her. And she's walking towards the camera, and she's coming closer. Just keep building it. Just keep building it. And she's getting close. Now reach some kind of climax. And I would go, and he said, oh, that's it. She's starting to leave. So fall down. Keep falling. Keep falling. Keep falling. Now go back into the dark woods. David got up. He gave me a big hug. He said, Angelo, that's Twin Peaks. I said, okay, David, I'll go home and I'll work on it. He said, Angelo, don't do a thing and don't change a signal note. I see Twin Peaks. And that's how it was done.
Simply put, Angelo Badalamenti was a genius. He would end up winning the Grammy Award for Best Pop Instrumental Performance for the Twin Peaks theme. His music sets the atmosphere in every scene in which it appears, and he would continue to work with Lynch going forward. Though the pilot was complete, like so often throughout Lynch's career, there was to be a battle to present it before an audience. Brandon Stoddard, the individual who had ordered the pilot for ABC, left the network in March of 1989, a month after the Twin Peaks shoot began. With Stoddard gone, it was up to programming executive Robert Iger to will the show onto the air. He had quite the uphill battle before him, as ABC was still indecisive about taking a risk with such a bizarre show. It all came to a head during a conference call between Iger and a room full of New York executives. Iger, thankfully, won the battle, and in May of 1989, ABC finally picked up the series as a mid-season show and ordered 7 more episodes. Budgeted at $1.1 million each, the episodes were all written and completed months before the pilot aired.
Diane, 2:15 p.m. I've just checked into the Great Northern Hotel in Twin Peaks. I've got to find out what kind of incredible trees they've got up here. I'll be meeting the sheriff at the morgue to examine the girl's body. There's a good chance the person who committed these crimes is...
Twin Peaks, a nice place to visit, but you wouldn't want to die there. Later tonight.
I don't know quite how the network decided to let Twin Peaks become a pilot, but just because they let something become a pilot, it doesn't mean they're going to make it into a series. So it got that far, and even then they didn't really know what to do with it. They send these things to a place, I think it's in Philadelphia, and they have people watch the shows and grade them. Somehow it got a fairly good score, but not spectacular. I don't know what happened between that time and the time it aired, but it just got a huge, huge share that opening night. So that was a very lucky thing.
Due to the network's hesitancy, a whole year had passed between the pilot's completion and the premiere on April 8, 1990.
Stay tuned now for the 2-hour season premiere of Twin Peaks on the ABC Sunday Night Movie next.
The 2-hour pilot was viewed by 34.6 million people and quickly gained a cult following. The success of the premiere is in part thanks to audience enthusiasm from early screenings. The first article on Twin Peaks appeared in the September issue of Connoisseur magazine, headlined, "The Series That Will Change TV Forever."
Well, one of the things we decided to consciously do when we first started out was go to the press with the show and say, please help us, because we may die a premature death here if we're just going to depend on the network and the network numbers So it was a conscious effort initially to show the show to press people and hopefully garner their support going into our initial set of broadcasts.
Through word of mouth, the show spread like wildfire and very quickly was recognized for the landmark achievement it was. It cemented itself in popular culture very quickly. Northwest Passage is spellbinding. Mark describes the pilot perfectly. The pilot is really still and quiet, and the first half hour is almost entirely people grieving and getting bad news. It has an air of reality and a pace people weren't used to. It takes its time, and although it tells an intricate story, it doesn't do it in a flashy way. It has touches of the mythical that take it into another realm, but remains grounded. I couldn't have put it more perfectly. On my first viewing of the pilot, I was struck by how each and every person who knew Laura Palmer was lamenting her untimely death. Her murder wasn't a vehicle for a driving mystery. It was instead written like a tragedy, with an emphasis on the gaping hole her life left behind. The critic reviews for the most part were positive. Tom Shales in the Washington Post wrote, "Twin Peaks disorients you in ways that small screen productions seldom attempt. It's a pleasurable sensation, the floor dropping out and leaving one dangling." Richard Zoglin in Time magazine said that it may be the most hauntingly original work ever done for American TV. But despite the high acclaim, cracks began to show far earlier than anyone involved would have liked. During the stalemate between the show's completion and its premiere, David Lynch began to work on his next film, Wild at Heart.
Somewhere along the way, Twin Peaks became like a TV show rather than a film, and when it stopped being just Mark and me, I kinda lost interest. And then I read Wild at Heart and really liked the characters. The way that happened was Monty came to me and said, "David, I read this book called Wild at Heart and I want to direct it. Would you consider being executive producer?" I said, "Let me read the book." And then as a joke, I said, "Monty, what if I really love this book and I want to direct it?" And Monty said, "Then you'll direct it, David." And that's what happened.
As excitement with the show continued ramping up, they hired writers to compensate for Lynch's absence. Mark Frost describes the measures they took to ensure that the show was in good hands. David and I wrote the first 2 episodes of the first season together, then I started developing a writing staff that included Harry Payton and Robert Ingalls. When other writers came in, they were given ground rules and detailed storylines, and we'd talk about what the content and tone of the scenes would be. We'd record those sessions and give the tape to the writers so they could refer to it as they worked. Although Frost's cherry-picked competent writing team should work in theory, it never could replicate the magic Frost and Lynch created together. In the book Lynch on Lynch, author Chris Rodley asked Lynch if he was unhappy with the direction Twin Peaks was taking in his absence. David Lynch responds, "If Mark and I had been working together, it would have been different, but we weren't, so it was the way it was. I went to a couple of meetings with writers and things like that, but unless you're right in there and you're hands-on, that's one of the frustrating things about TV. There are other directors, other writers, other things that come in. It may be fine, but it's not what you would do. It's frustrating." It sounds like the reality of the major commitment that's required of doing a TV show was finally wearing on Lynch. When he set out to do the show, he loved the idea of an ever-developing story with no end in sight. But it sounds like that dream wasn't as enticing to him anymore. Lynch describes this dilemma to Chris Rodney. "Although I loved the idea of a continuing story, those stories have to be written, and every week you have to do another show, and pretty soon it catches up with you and you find you don't have enough time to get down in there and do what you're supposed to do, and it becomes something you don't really want to do."
Harry, I've got it. I'll throw this rock at the window. If it breaks, Leo is innocent. Leo, you're free to go.
When production began on season 2, it was clear to everyone on set that the honeymoon was over. Lynch was there less and less, and Frost, too, was saddled with his own time constraints. There were certainly some weaknesses in the storytelling in the second season, Frost admitted. David was off doing Wild at Heart, and I'd signed up to direct a movie called Storyville, so we were stretched too thin. Plus, we stupidly listened to our agents and sold another show to Fox called American Chronicles. There weren't enough hours in the day to do all these things the right way.
When I came back from Wild at Heart, I didn't know what was going on with the show. All I remember feeling is that it was a runaway train and you had to commit to it 24/7 to keep it on track. I think if it had been Mark and me writing together on every episode, we would have been okay, but we didn't do that and other people came in.
This is nothing against any of them, but they didn't know my Twin Peaks, and it just ceased to be anything I recognized. When I came back to do an episode, I tried to change things and make it what I wanted, but then it would go off again on other stupid fucking things. It just wasn't fun anymore. Then the show got moved from Thursday to Saturday night, and that wasn't a good thing either. I have no idea why it got moved. That time slot he speaks of absolutely killed any forward momentum the show had. It may sound counterintuitive that Saturday is a worse slot, but to a TV serial, it proved deadly.
Okay, which one of you guys did it? Which one of you put 3 of the best TV shows on Saturday night? Was it you? Nobody's ever done this before. Have you lost your mind? If this doesn't work.
While talking to Rodney, Lynch put it into perspective perfectly. It had to be a weeknight because people were talking about it the next day at their place of work, and it was a cool thing. Then they moved it to Saturday night, so by the time Monday rolled around, it was too far away. Additionally, Twin Peaks enthusiasts were way too cool to be watching TV on a Saturday night.
Those popularity polls, we've been decreasing in them steadily. And there may be lots of reasons, but it doesn't make any difference. Now we're sort of in trouble, and we think that we have a good show, and we can do well on a weeknight, because we feel very strongly that the people who like Twin Peaks are party people. They enjoy.
What does that mean exactly?
They are not home on Saturday night.
Oh, I see. They're out of.
They don't want to be home on Saturday night, and so to have the show on that would be wrong.
Right.
After ABC moved Twin Peaks to the lonely limbo of Saturday night, ratings continued to drop. To add to this, the beginning of the Gulf War and coverage thereof consumed network programming. Here's Mark Frost. Then television was kind of hijacked by the Gulf War, and we were preempted by the war for 6 out of 8 weeks. People couldn't keep up with what was a complex piece of storytelling when they could only see the shows sporadically.
From ABC News, this is a Gulf War update.
The popularity of continuing stories on TV goes in waves. Periodically, the networks do these polls, and they come up with different things. At one time, they had determined that people don't watch every single week. People may watch 2 times a month, and so the reasoning went, they lose their way in a continuing story and drop away from the show. Obviously, the networks don't want people to drop away, so for a certain period of time, they soured on a continuing story and wanted closed endings.
The reveal of Laura Palmer's killer, the central mystery of the show, would put an end to what would be known as the golden period of Twin Peaks. Midway through season 2, ABC required the identity of Laura's murder be found out.
In the beginning, Twin Peaks was huge, but ABC never really loved the show, and when people started writing in and asking, when are we going to find out who killed Laura Palmer? They forced us to tell, and then people stopped watching. I told them if they revealed the killer, it would be the end of it, and it was the end of it. There was something else going on. There was a time when a continuing story was accepted and people stayed with it. But then the advertisers started saying, people miss a couple of episodes and they can't get back into the show and they stop watching, so we've got to do closed endings. And that changed the feeling of the show too. I think it's all run by money. By the time Bob Iger came to us and said, you gotta solve this mystery, I was sort of fed up anyway.
One of these people murdered Laura Palmer. It was a mystery that captured the imagination of the whole country. Tonight, the killer will finally be revealed. Really.
I am just so happy.
Twin Peaks next.
On November 10th, 1990, the reveal was aired in the episode Lonely Souls. 17.2 million households tuned in, a staggering 5.9 million increase since the previous episode. So, the puzzle was solved. But were there any missing pieces? Well, no. Even though Lynch never intended to reveal the killer's true identity, they always knew who it was. For his book, Chris Rodney asked Lynch if he and Frost knew from the start. We knew, but we didn't even hardly whisper it when we were working. We tried to keep it out of our conscious minds, because it wasn't something we had to deal with right away. There were enough other things to give latitude to other problems. It just hung there. They went to extreme lengths to keep this secret under wraps because they knew it would leak in a heartbeat. When they were shooting Maddie's murder scene with the killer and Bob in full sight, they filmed it with 2 different actors. To throw off the cast and crew, they had both Leland Palmer and Benjamin Horne do the scene full out. When talking to Rodney, Lynch remarked on how impressed he was with this scheme. "I've got to say that Richard Baymer was really a great sport, because he knew it wasn't him. We told him, we're going to shoot the scene, but it's not you. So he did it for real, like it was him, but he knew all the time it wasn't." Although this reveal was beautifully and effectively executed, something reflected in Lynch's continued fascination with the narrative leading into Fire Walk with Me, it also served as a major dividing line and was ultimately a key factor in what drove Lynch away. From my point of view, I love how the reveal was handled with care. It was not only shockingly tragic, but also redemptive. My biggest gripe, however, is how all this occurs in the middle of the season. With our primary mystery solved, the rest of the season feels aimless.
Look away! Look away! Look away!
But the plot wasn't the only thing declining with the show. Each episode after the reveal had less and less viewers. So, in February of 1991, ABC put the show on hiatus. Outraged, cult followers formed an aptly named group, COOP. It stands for the Coalition Opposed to Offing Peaks. Together, they commenced a letter-writing campaign. Lynch himself encouraged this movement when he appeared on The Late Show with David Letterman. He used that as an opportunity to implore viewers to write to Bob Iger and advocate that they keep the show on air.
If it has to end, that's all right. But if it doesn't have to end, that's even better. Mm-hmm. And I'm asking people to write to Bob Iger, the president of ABC. Uh-huh. And if I could give the address.
Yes, please.
It's very difficult to write a letter. People say, okay, I'll write a letter, but when it comes down to it, it's hard, and I understand that. But if they could write a letter to Bob Iger.
Bob Iger, E-I-G-E-R.
I-G-E-R.
I-G-E-R.
Right.
Okay, Bob Iger.
ABC Television, 77 West 66th Street.
Right.
New York, 10023.
Okay. Do you know this guy?
Yes, he's a real good guy.
And is he on your side?
He is.
Yeah, okay.
But he needs to know certain things from the people.
Yeah.
More than 10,000 letters were sent, so ABC was obliged to capitulate. They allowed the season to continue for a conclusion and restored the show's original Thursday time slot.
Annie M.
Annie M.
I must have been dreaming. It was horrible. We were all on Saturdays. Andy, you were there. The log lady was there. The man from another place was there, too.
Saturdays. That is a bad dream.
Whoa. Twin Peaks is back on Thursday nights.
Diane, Thursday nights. There's no place like home.
To celebrate this success, members of COOP were invited on set by the production team of Twin Peaks. The following footage was recorded on that day.
Thank you for saving our... Did you save our... Tell me, what is this again?
Citizens opposing the offing of COOP.
Citizens what?
Opposing.
Opposing.
The offing
of
peaks.
Peaks. Oh, peaks. Got it. Okay. This is good. Did it work?
You can ask us questions,
Now
maybe.
we're cooking. Now we're cooking.
This is Jennifer.
Wait. This is very, there's not much light in here, is there?
No.
Let me just focus. This is good. These are the folks that have helped to bring Twin Peaks back. Okay? All right. Well, that's wonderful.
I don't know. I was one of the ones who thought that, Saturday night was going to be just the greatest thing in the world, I guess, because I'm so old. I remember when Saturday night was the biggest night of the week on television, and I thought it was going to be great, but I was wrong. So now we're back on Thursday nights, opposite the biggest guns on television on those other networks, that Cheez-It show or whatever the hell it is. And, that's, I guess, where we should be, opposite the biggest guns on TV, help us blow them out of the water. We'll love that. Thanks.
Thank you for your efforts in getting us back on the air, because you're responsible. So whatever happens, it's on your head. Really appreciate it.
It's party night again, Thursdays at 9, and I can't thank you all enough. Coop has really been instrumental in getting Twin Peaks back.
So hip hip hooray, get yourself some pie, be careful of drinking and driving, and hope you enjoy the shows.
All the while, Mark Frost and David Lynch's working relationship had developed some tension. Let's hear it from producer Tony Krantz. They created the show together, and what Mark brought was an approach to storytelling that allowed David's art to exist on television, and that was a critical piece. One doesn't exist without the other, and they were a perfect unit. But Mark felt that David was getting all the credit, and his ego got in the middle of it. Mark got the recognition he wanted with the second season when he was sort of in charge and had an opportunity to finally make Mark Frost's Twin Peaks. He and Harley Peyton created new stories for the second season that introduced new characters rather than focusing on the core series regulars. David wasn't happy with the scripts though, and there were storylines he hadn't pre-approved. It was like, hey, wait a minute, you're misperceiving the dream that made the first season of Twin Peaks so great. You're mimicking and making faux versions of them. While Frost has never openly admitted to this ego wound himself, I can totally see how it may be true. If that were actually the case, Frost's frustration is valid. The devaluing of Frost's contributions can even be seen in the presentation of this video, which is obviously extremely Lynch-centric. In my opinion, what makes the show most memorable are Lynch's unique contributions, even if Mark Frost gave it structure and contributed significantly to the story. When Lynch tackled Fire Walk with Me on his own, he flawlessly encapsulated the spirit of the show. However, at the time, it was lambasted by both critics and audiences, which, to Frost's credit, was probably because the story lacked the cohesive scaffolding he brought to it.
Out of all the directors that we worked with and people that would come and go and some would come back again, for me it was the best when David was there, because sometimes, in my opinion again, I feel like David encourages one to go into dark places inside of them and see what's going on and to embrace them, that's beautiful, that's good. And I think sometimes people came onto the show and would just do weird things for the sake of being weird. And I feel that part of David's work is soul-based, and it's a part of his truth on some very personal level. And it's not, let's just shock value and be weird for being weird. The show wouldn't have been a success if that's what it was about. It had a bottom of truth.
Lynch returned to the Twin Peaks set in March 1991 to direct the season finale, knowing that it would most likely be the last.
The fate of the series Twin Peaks has been almost as much of a mystery as where Bob might show up next. First it was off, and now it's back on, but on Thursday nights. The last 6 episodes will begin airing on March 28th. Cast and crew are wrapping up what could be the last episode ever of the series, with David Lynch directing.
But, in contrarian Lynch fashion, he didn't give the show a closed ending. Instead, he ended with a cliffhanger that birthed a whole new mystery.
Are you okay?
For Lynch to return to a show that had become so fractured and alien to his original vision, and to re-immerse both himself and the characters back into his world, is an incredible accomplishment. He went out with a bang, delivering one of the most memorable TV endings in history. The fact that he continued with the world speaks to his passion for the story. His lack of involvement for season 2 wasn't due to a personal disinterest in the narrative, but rather the limitations of network programming.
Stay tuned for the final episode of Twin Peaks on the ABC Monday Night Movie next.
What saved the show in a sense, or at least kept it strong in the social consciousness going forward, was Lynch's monumental creative effort in the show's finale, where we finally re-enter the Red Room, aka the Black Lodge, where lovable Annie disappears and Cooper, trying to save her, undergoes some kind of mysterious transference. People eventually stopped loving Twin Peaks, but at least it ended in a good way, because that's when the Red Room came. I can't talk about what the Red Room is, but I remember when the idea came and how thrilling it was to me. That opened up a thing in Twin Peaks and led to many things. So it's the pilot and the Red Room and where they lead. Put those things together and you've got the real Twin Peaks. It's a beautiful, delicate thing, and there's more going on than meets the eye, and there's mystery in the air.
And now, an ending.
On June 10th, 1991, the season 2 finale aired, and with it, ABC announced that the show had reached the end of its lifespan. Twin Peaks was, in many ways, the perfect storm, a confluence of Lynch at the height of his commercial success, introducing a new cinematic style to the mainstream, and Mark Frost, already ahead of his time with Hill Street Blues, bringing his expertise from television to create a collaboration that few could have imagined. The producers, Tony Krantz, Brandon Stoddard, and Robert Iger, also deserve recognition. They believed in the show and played a crucial role in convincing ABC to air this radical, unconventional, and groundbreaking piece of television. The fact that David Lynch approached Twin Peaks as if it were a movie and not a TV show is what created this almost entirely new genre of programming. A type of television that is uncompromising, does not stoop to its limitations, and is an extension of cinema. In the end, it was really just the red tape, the financial and corporate limitations that put a cap on it all, more so than any made-up idea of what a TV show should be. So it should come as no surprise that when Showtime approached Lynch 25 years after the finale, he said, "This is not a negotiation. If you want to do it, this is what it takes." Next time on Camcorder Cameron.
It has been a pleasure speaking to you.
Okay, thanks for making it to the end of this video. It's time for me to give a little Patreon shout out. Thank you to my Patreon members and my channel members. You guys really fuel this channel, and I appreciate every single one of you. All right, until next time, Camcorder Cameron signing out.